The scene opens in a busy television studio buzzing with activity. Cameras are being adjusted, microphones checked, and the audience is settling into their seats, chatting excitedly about what's to come. On one side of the set sits a well-known liberal TV host, someone famous for his sharp tongue and knack for steering debates in his favor. Across from him is Karoline Leavitt, a rising conservative voice known for her bold opinions and quick wit. The energy in the room feels electric. Everyone knows this could be a heated exchange. As the countdown begins, the host flashes a confident smile at the camera while Karoline calmly adjusts her notes. She doesn't seem nervous. Instead, there's a quiet determination in her eyes. When the show starts, the host greets the audience and introduces the topic of the day, a controversial political issue dividing the nation. He then turns to Karoline, his tone polite but laced with an undertone of superiority. It's clear he thinks he has the upper hand. "So, Ms. Leavitt," he begins, leaning back in his chair as if already sure of his victory. "Your side has been criticized heavily for this stance. How do you justify it?" The question hangs in the air, loaded and pointed, but instead of looking flustered or defensive, Karoline leans forward slightly, meeting his gaze without hesitation. "Well," she starts, her voice steady and calm, "before we dive into justifications, let's make sure we're talking about facts and not assumptions." Her response catches the host off guard. He wasn't expecting such composure, or worse, a challenge to clarify his own question. For a brief second, he fumbles, unsure how to respond. Meanwhile, the audience perks up. Something tells them they're about to witness more than just another predictable debate. Karoline continues, breaking down the issue in simple terms anyone can understand. She explains why her perspective matters and uses real-life examples that resonate with everyday people. Whether it's a struggling small business owner or a parent worried about their child's education, her words hit home. The host listens, silently, his earlier confidence wavering. By the time she finishes, the audience is nodding along, some even murmuring agreement. It's only the first round, but Karoline has already made her mark. Seeing the shift in dynamics, the host quickly regains his footing. He attempts to steer the conversation back to his advantage by bringing up statistics and studies supporting his viewpoint. "These numbers speak for themselves," he declares, crossing his arms as though the matter is settled. But Karoline isn't intimidated. Instead, she smiles faintly, tilting her head as if considering his argument carefully. "No," she says after a pause. "Numbers can tell different stories depending on who's telling them. Let me show you what I mean." With that, she counters his points with her own data, weaving in personal stories that paint a fuller picture. She talks about individuals she's met during her travels, sharing their struggles and triumphs. Her approach isn't just factual, it's human, and that's what makes it so compelling. As the segment progresses, the host grows visibly frustrated. His attempts to dominate the conversation keep falling flat because Karoline refuses to play by his rules. Every time he tries to corner her, she slips away with a clever remark or a thoughtful insight. At one point, he smirks and says, "I suppose someone like you would see things this way," clearly trying to undermine her credibility. But far from shrinking back, Karoline meets his comment head-on. "Someone like me?" she repeats, raising an eyebrow. There's a playful edge to her tone now, one that hints at mischief. "You mean someone who actually listens to people instead of lecturing them?" The audience erupts into applause, cheering loudly. Even the crew behind the scenes can't help but chuckle. The host, caught off guard, stammers for a moment before moving on. But the damage is done. He's lost control of the narrative, and everyone knows it. What started as a routine political debate has turned into something much bigger. Karoline's blend of intelligence, humor, and authenticity is winning over not just the live audience but also viewers watching from home. Social media platforms begin lighting up with reactions, clips of her best moments circulating rapidly. People are loving her ability to stand firm, yet remain relatable. Meanwhile, the host scrambles to regain his footing, but it's becoming increasingly clear that tonight belongs to Karoline. By the end of the first half of the segment, the mood in the studio has shifted entirely. What was supposed to be a straightforward discussion has become a battle of wits, and Karoline is proving herself to be a formidable opponent. As the commercial break approaches, the host glances at her with a mix of frustration and grudging respect. Little does he know, the best is yet to come. As the show returns from the commercial break, the tension in the studio is thicker than ever. The host tries to regain his footing by shifting gears. He leans forward, resting his elbows on the table, and adopts a more serious tone. "Let's talk about accountability," he says, his voice firm. "Your side often talks about personal responsibility, but isn't it true that many of your policies disproportionately affect marginalized communities?" It's a loaded question, designed to corner Karoline into either defending controversial policies or appearing insensitive. But Karoline doesn't blink. She takes a moment to gather her thoughts, then responds with a calmness that disarms the host. "You're absolutely right to bring up accountability," she says, nodding slightly as if acknowledging the importance of the topic. "But let's be clear. Personal responsibility and systemic support aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, they should go hand in hand." Her words are measured, each one landing with precision. She goes on to explain how policies can empower individuals, while also addressing larger societal issues. She uses relatable examples like workforce training programs that help people gain skills and confidence instead of simply handing out short-term solutions. "It's not about taking away help," she says, her voice warm but firm. "It's about giving people the tools to build better lives for themselves. That's real progress." The audience listens intently, some nodding along, others scribbling notes or whispering to their neighbors. Even the host seems momentarily thrown, off balance. He wasn't expecting such a balanced response, one that acknowledges his concern while flipping the narrative back in her favor. For a brief moment, the studio feels quieter than usual, as if everyone is processing what she just said. Not willing to concede, the host quickly switches tactics. He brings up another hot-button issue, this time focusing on environmental policy. "Your party has been criticized for not taking climate change seriously enough," he says, his tone sharp. "How do you respond to those who say you're putting profits over the planet?" It's a classic move, trying to paint her side as uncaring or reckless, but Karoline is ready. She smiles faintly, leaning back in her chair as if she's been waiting for this exact question. "Let me ask you something," she begins, her tone conversational but pointed. "Do you believe we can solve climate change by shutting down industries and leaving millions of workers without jobs? Is that really the kind of future we want to create?" The host opens his mouth to respond, but she presses on before he can interrupt. "We need practical solutions that protect both the environment and the economy," she continues. "For example, investing in clean energy technology creates jobs and reduces emissions. It's not an either-or situation. It's about finding smart ways to move forward." Her argument is simple yet powerful, appealing to logic and common sense. The audience erupts into applause again, clearly impressed by her ability to tackle tough questions head-on. Feeling the pressure mounting, the host decides to take a riskier approach. He shifts from policy debates to personal attacks, though he tries to mask them as legitimate concerns. "Some critics have called you divisive," he says, raising an eyebrow. "They say your rhetoric fuels polarization rather than bridging divides. What do you say to that?" Karoline pauses, letting the weight of his words hang in the air. When she finally speaks, her tone is softer but still resolute. "I think it's important to call things as they are," she says. "Yes, I'll stand up for what I believe in, even if it makes some people uncomfortable. But here's the thing, being honest doesn't mean being divisive. Sometimes telling the truth is the first step toward finding common ground." Her response silences the host momentarily. He had hoped to rattle her with vague accusations, but instead, she turned his critique into a statement of principle. The audience senses the shift too. There's a murmur of approval rippling through the crowd. Some people even stand up to cheer, forcing the host to wait before continuing. Desperate to regain control, the host throws out another accusation. "Aren't you worried that your approach alienates moderates?" he asks, his voice rising slightly. After all, compromise is key to solving big problems. It's a fair point, but Karoline handles it with grace and wit. Compromise is important, she agrees, nodding. But let's not confuse compromise with capitulation. You don't solve problems by abandoning your values. You solve them by working together to find solutions that work for everyone. She pauses, letting her words sink in. And honestly, I think most people appreciate honesty over empty promises. They want leaders who listen, not ones who just tell them what they want to hear. By now, the dynamic between the two has completely flipped. Where the host once seemed confident and in charge, he now appears defensive and flustered. His attempts to undermine Karoline have backfired spectacularly, making him look unprepared and outmatched. Meanwhile, Karoline exudes calm confidence, her every word resonating with authenticity. As the segment nears its halfway point, the host makes one last-ditch effort to regain the upper hand. He brings up a recent controversy involving her party, hoping to catch her off guard. "What about this scandal?" he asks, gesturing emphatically. "How does your side plan to address the backlash?" Karoline doesn't miss a beat. She addresses the issue directly, explaining the context and outlining steps being taken to resolve it. Her transparency surprises the host and impresses the audience. Instead of dodging or deflecting, she faces the problem head-on, showing accountability and leadership. By the time the segment heads into its next phase, it's clear that Karoline has seized the momentum. The host, visibly frustrated, struggles to keep up as she dismantles his arguments with clarity and conviction. The audience is fully engaged now, hanging on her every word. Social media is ablaze with reactions, clips of her best moments going viral in real time. What started as a routine debate has become something extraordinary, a masterclass in poise, preparation, and persuasion. And the best part? There's still plenty of time left for Karoline to deliver the knockout punch. As the debate rolls into its third act, the host, now visibly rattled, decides to change tactics yet again. He shifts from direct accusations to a more subtle form of attack, mockery disguised as curiosity. Leaning back in his chair, he smirks and says, "You seem very confident in your answers, but isn't it true that confidence can sometimes be mistaken for arrogance? How do you respond to critics who say you're out of touch with everyday people?" The question lands with a thud, clearly meant to undermine Karoline's credibility by painting her as someone disconnected from reality. But instead of reacting, defensively, she lets out a soft laugh, one that feels genuine, not forced. She tilts her head slightly, as if considering the question thoughtfully before responding. "You know," she begins, her tone conversational but deliberate, "I think there's a big difference between confidence and arrogance. Confidence comes from knowing what you stand for and being willing to listen to others, even when you don't agree with them. Arrogance, on the other hand, is shutting people down because they see things differently." Her gaze locks onto the host's, and for a brief moment the room feels eerily quiet. If standing up for hardworking families, small business owners, and communities that feel forgotten makes me out of touch, then so be it. I'd rather be out of touch with elites than out of touch with the people who wake up every day, trying to make ends meet. The audience erupts into applause, some standing to cheer. The host, caught off guard by her unshakable composure, fumbles for a response. He hadn't expected her to turn his own critique back on him, and worse, to do it in a way that resonates so deeply with the crowd. For a split second, he looks unsure of himself, glancing at his notes as if searching for a lifeline. Sensing his discomfort, Karoline presses her advantage. "Let me ask you something," she says, leaning forward slightly. Her voice carries both warmth and authority, drawing everyone's attention. "When was the last time you sat down with someone who disagrees with you, not to argue, but to truly understand where they're coming from? Because I'll tell you this, the best ideas come from conversations, not lectures." The comment hits home, not just for the host, but for everyone watching. It's a simple yet profound reminder of what's missing in so many political discussions. Today, empathy. The audience murmurs in agreement, nodding along as Karoline continues. "We can disagree without being disagreeable. We can challenge each other without tearing each other down. That's how we move forward. Together. For a moment, the host sits silently, his earlier bravado replaced by uncertainty. He attempts to pivot, throwing out another question in hopes of regaining control. But isn't it true that compromise often requires giving up something important? He asks, his tone sharper now, almost pleading. How do you balance staying true to your principles while still finding common ground? Karoline doesn't hesitate. She smiles faintly, as if she's been waiting for this exact question. Great question, she says, her voice steady and calm. Here's the thing. Staying true to your principles doesn't mean refusing to budge. It means knowing what matters most and fighting for it, while also recognizing areas where flexibility can lead to progress. She goes on to share an example from her own life, talking about a community project she helped organize. We brought together people from all walks of life, some conservative, some liberal, some somewhere in between. At first, it felt like we'd never agree on anything. But once we focused on what united us instead of what divided us, we found solutions that worked for everyone. Her story strikes a chord with the audience. People nod along, some even whispering to their neighbors about similar experiences in their own lives. The host, realizing he's losing ground, tries to interrupt, but Karoline holds her ground. It's not always easy, she admits, her tone sincere. But nothing worth doing ever is. And if we're serious about solving problems, we need to stop treating every disagreement as a battle to be won. By now, the energy in the studio has shifted entirely. What started as a tense showdown has transformed into a lesson on civility and collaboration. The host, desperate to reclaim the narrative, throws out one final accusation. So you're saying your side has all the answers? He asks, his voice tinged with sarcasm. Isn't that just another form of arrogance? Karoline chuckles, softly, shaking her head. No, I'm not saying we have all the answers, she replies. In fact, I'd argue no one does. But here's the difference. We're willing to listen, to learn, and to work with anyone who shares our goal of making life better for everyone. If that's arrogance, then I guess I'll take it. Her response draws laughter and applause from the audience, further underscoring the growing divide between her poise and the host's increasingly frantic attempts to regain control. As the segment moves closer to its climax, it's clear that Karoline has not only won the argument, she's won the hearts and minds of those watching. Behind the scenes, the crew exchanges glances, impressed by how effortlessly Karoline has navigated the toughest questions thrown her way. Even the stage manager gives her a discreet thumbs up, a rare gesture of approval in the high-stakes world of live television. Meanwhile, the host, sweating under the bright studio lights, realizes he may have underestimated his opponent. The next few minutes will determine whether he can salvage any dignity, or if Karoline's dominance will seal his fate once and for all. The debate is now reaching its peak, and the tension in the studio is almost tangible. The host, visibly frustrated but unwilling to admit defeat, decides to throw what he believes will be his final punch, a loaded question designed to paint Karoline as out of step with modern values. Let's talk about progress, he says, leaning forward with a smug grin. Your side often talks about tradition and heritage, but isn't it true that clinging to the past holds us back from real change? Shouldn't we focus on moving forward instead of looking backward? For a moment, there's silence. The audience leans in, curious to hear how Karoline will respond to this sweeping critique. She doesn't rush. Instead, she takes a deep breath, her expression thoughtful yet calm. When she speaks, her voice carries a quiet authority that commands attention. Progress is important, she begins, nodding slightly as if acknowledging the validity of his point. But here's the thing. Progress doesn't mean abandoning everything that came before. It means building on what works while leaving behind what doesn't. Her tone is conversational, as though she's explaining something simple to a friend rather than debating a seasoned TV host. She pauses, letting her words sink in before continuing. Think about it this way. Would you tear down an entire house just because one room needs repairs? Of course not. You fix what's broken and improve what's outdated, but you don't throw away the foundation that keeps the whole structure standing. Her analogy lands perfectly, drawing nods of agreement from the audience. Some people chuckle softly, appreciating her ability to make complex ideas feel relatable. The host, however, looks less amused. He hadn't expected her to turn his critique into such a compelling metaphor, one that reframes the entire conversation. But let's be clear, Karoline adds, her tone sharpening slightly. Real progress isn't about forcing everyone to conform to a single idea of what forward looks like. It's about creating opportunities for all kinds of people to thrive in their own way. That's why I believe in policies that empower individuals, not ones that dictate how they should live. Her words strike a nerve, especially among viewers who feel overlooked by mainstream narratives. Social media lights up with reactions, fans praising her for speaking directly to their concerns. Meanwhile, the host shifts uncomfortably in his seat, sensing that he's losing ground fast. Desperate to regain control, he interrupts her mid-sentence. "So you're saying tradition is more important than innovation?" he asks, his voice rising slightly. "Isn't that just nostalgia masquerading as policy?" Karoline raises an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed by his attempt to derail her. "No, I'm saying balance is key," she replies firmly. "Tradition gives us roots, and innovation gives us wings. We need both to move forward responsibly." She leans forward, her gaze locking onto his. "And honestly, I think most people are tired of being told they have to choose sides. They want leaders who focus on solutions, not labels." The audience erupts into applause again, some standing to cheer. The host, realizing he's walking into quicksand, tries to pivot once more. "But isn't it true that your side often resists change when it comes to social issues?" He presses, his tone accusatory. "How do you reconcile that with calls for unity and progress?" Karoline doesn't flinch. If anything, she seems energized by the challenge. "Change is inevitable," she says, her voice steady. "But meaningful. Change takes time. It requires listening, understanding, and finding common ground. Rushing headlong into drastic measures without considering the consequences does more harm than good." She goes on to share another personal story, this time about a community initiative she supported. There was a town struggling with unemployment due to factory closures. Some wanted immediate action, shutting down industries and transitioning overnight to new sectors. But others argued for a phased approach that retrained workers while keeping existing jobs intact. Guess which option actually worked? The audience murmurs in approval as she continues. "It wasn't perfect, and it took longer than anyone liked, but in the end, the town rebuilt itself stronger than before. That's what real progress looks like. Practical, inclusive, and sustainable." Her response leaves the host scrambling. He attempts to counter her points, but his arguments sound hollow compared to her grounded examples. Frustrated, he resorts to sarcasm. "So you're saying slow and steady wins the race?" he quips, rolling his eyes. Karoline smiles faintly, unfazed by his mockery. "Funny you should say that," she replies, "because history proves it's true. Rome wasn't built in a day, and neither is lasting change." Her delivery is so smooth, so confident, that even the crew can't help but chuckle. The host, realizing he's dug himself into a hole, tries one last desperate move. "What about the younger generation?" he asks, his tone suddenly urgent. "They're demanding radical action on issues like climate change and inequality. How do you plan to address their concerns without alienating them?" Karoline doesn't hesitate. "Young people are passionate, and that's a good thing," she says warmly. "But passion alone won't solve problems. We need practical plans too. For example, investing in green technology creates jobs and protects the environment. Supporting affordable housing helps families and strengthens communities. These aren't radical ideas. They're smart solutions that benefit everyone." Her answer draws thunderous applause, the kind that makes the floor vibrate. Even the skeptics in the audience seem swayed by her balanced approach. As the segment heads toward its final stretch, it's clear that Karoline has not only dismantled every argument thrown her way, she's done it with grace, wit, and undeniable authenticity. Behind the scenes, the producer whispers to the director, "This might be the best interview we've had all year." On stage, The host wipes sweat from his brow, finally accepting that he's been outmatched. The audience, electrified by Karoline's performance, eagerly awaits what she'll say next. Whatever it is, they know it's going to be unforgettable. As the debate moves into its fifth act, the host is clearly running out of ammunition. His earlier confidence has evaporated, replaced by a mix of frustration and desperation. He tries one last gambit, hoping to regain some semblance of control over the conversation. "All right," he says, leaning back in his chair with an exaggerated sigh, as if conceding a point before making it. "Let's talk about leadership. You've mentioned accountability and practical solutions, but isn't it true that your side often struggles to deliver results? How can people trust you when promises go unfulfilled?" The question hangs in the air, heavy with accusation. It's a classic tactic, shifting the focus from policy specifics to broader criticisms, hoping to paint Karoline's side as unreliable. But instead of recoiling or offering a defensive rebuttal, Karoline meets the challenge head-on with her trademark blend of honesty and insight. "Fair question," she begins, nodding slightly to acknowledge the weight of his critique. Her tone is calm but firm, exuding the kind of sincerity that makes people sit up and listen. "Here's the truth. No leader, no matter how well-intentioned, gets everything right all the time. Mistakes happen. That's part of being human. What matters is how we respond to those mistakes." She pauses, letting her words settle before continuing. "When something doesn't work, we owe it to the people to admit it, learn from it, and fix it. That's what accountability looks like. It's not about pointing fingers or assigning blame. It's about finding ways to move forward together." Her response strikes a chord with the audience. Some nod in agreement, while others whisper to their neighbors about how refreshing it feels to hear someone acknowledge imperfection without hesitation. The host, however, isn't ready to let go just yet. He seizes on her admission, pressing further. "But isn't admitting failure a sign of weakness?" he counters, his voice tinged with skepticism. "Shouldn't leaders inspire confidence, not doubt?" Karoline lets out a soft laugh, shaking her head as if amused by the irony of his question. "Confidence doesn't mean pretending you're perfect," she replies. "Real confidence comes from knowing who you are, owning your mistakes, and working hard to do better next time. People don't expect perfection, they expect authenticity. And honestly, I think they respect leaders who are willing to say, 'We got this wrong, but here's how we'll make it right.'" Her answer draws another round of applause, louder this time. Even the crew behind the scenes can't help but exchange approving glances. The host shifts uncomfortably in his seat, realizing too late that his attempt to corner her has only highlighted her strengths. Sensing his unease, Karoline presses her advantage. "Let me ask you something," she says, leaning forward slightly. Her voice carries both warmth and conviction, drawing everyone's attention. "When was the last time you saw someone apologize for getting something wrong and actually follow through on fixing it? Doesn't that earn more trust than empty promises or deflecting blame?" The question lands like a punch, leaving the host momentarily speechless. He stammers, searching for a response, but the audience senses the shift in momentum. Karoline has turned the tables once again, reframing the discussion around integrity and action rather than abstract critiques. Social media buzzes with reactions, fans praising her ability to dismantle even the toughest questions with clarity and grace. Desperate to regain ground, the host switches gears, attempting to steer the conversation toward a topic he believes will expose a flaw in her argument. "What about divisiveness?" he asks, his tone sharper now. "Critics say your rhetoric fuels polarization, especially among younger voters. How do you address that?" Karoline doesn't miss a beat. She leans back in her chair, her expression thoughtful but composed. "Divisiveness isn't created by calling out problems, it's created by ignoring them," she says. "If pointing out injustice or standing up for what's right makes me divisive, then so be it. But let's be clear, silence isn't unity, it's complacency." Her words resonate deeply, particularly with younger viewers tuning in online. Many take to social media to express how much they appreciate her candor, sharing clips of her responses across platforms. The host, sensing he's losing the room entirely, tries to interrupt, but Karoline holds her ground. "And let's talk about young voters for a second. she continues, her tone warm but pointed. They're passionate, driven, and eager to make a difference. But passion without direction isn't enough. We need to channel that energy into tangible solutions, things like expanding access to education, supporting small businesses, and investing in technology that creates jobs. Those aren't partisan issues, they're human issues. The audience erupts into applause, some standing to cheer. The host, visibly flustered, attempts to interject, but his voice is drowned out by the noise. For a brief moment, the studio feels chaotic, alive with energy. Karoline waits patiently for the commotion to die down, her composure unwavering. When the noise subsides, she delivers her closing thought for this segment. At the end of the day, leadership isn't about slogans or sound bites. It's about serving the people who put their trust in you. And if we're serious about earning that trust, we need to stop treating politics like a competition and start seeing it as a partnership. Her words hang in the air, simple, yet profound. The audience absorbs them, many nodding along in agreement. The host, now visibly defeated, sits silently, unsure of what to say next. He had walked into this debate confident, even cocky, but Karoline's poise, wit, and authenticity have left him reeling. As the segment transitions into its final stretch, the atmosphere in the studio has transformed completely. What began as a tense showdown has evolved into something far greater, a masterclass in communication, empathy, and resilience. The audience knows they've witnessed something special, and Karoline's name is already trending online. Whatever happens next, one thing is certain. She's made an indelible mark, not just on the host, but on everyone watching. As the debate enters its sixth act, the host is visibly struggling to keep up. His earlier confidence has been replaced by a mix of frustration and resignation. He tries one last desperate move, hoping to salvage some dignity before the segment wraps up. "All right," he says, leaning forward with a forced smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes. "Let's talk about the future. Your side often talks about protecting freedoms. But isn't it true that those freedoms can sometimes come at the expense of equality? How do you balance individual rights with collective responsibility?" It's a clever question, designed to force Karoline into choosing sides, either defend personal freedoms or appear indifferent to systemic issues. But Karoline doesn't bite. Instead, she takes a moment to think, her expression thoughtful yet calm. When she finally speaks, her voice carries the same warmth and conviction that has captivated the audience throughout the show. That's a great question because it gets to the heart of what makes our society work. Or sometimes doesn't, she begins. Freedom and equality aren't opposites. They're two sides of the same coin. The challenge is finding ways to protect both without sacrificing either. Her analogy sparks murmurs of agreement in the audience. People nod along, intrigued by how she's framing the issue. The host, sensing an opening, presses further. But isn't there always tension between the two? You can't have unlimited freedom without someone else losing out, right? Karoline smiles faintly as if expecting this follow-up. Of course there's tension. That's part of life. But the key isn't eliminating tension. It's managing it responsibly. For example, free speech is a fundamental freedom, but it comes with the responsibility to use it wisely. You don't shout fire in a crowded theater, not because your right to speak is being taken away, but because exercising that right recklessly could harm others. Her response draws approving nods from the audience. Some people even clap, softly, impressed by how she's breaking down such a complex topic into relatable terms. The host, however, isn't ready to concede just yet. He leans back in his chair, crossing his arms as if skeptical. "So you're saying freedom should have limits? Isn't that a slippery slope?" Karoline shakes her head, her tone patient but firm. "I'm saying freedom comes with accountability. Without it, we risk turning freedoms into tools for selfishness, instead of opportunities for growth. Think about it. Driving is a freedom, but we all agree on traffic laws to keep everyone safe. It's not about limiting freedom. It's about making sure it works for everyone." Her explanation resonates deeply, particularly among viewers who feel caught between competing values. Social media lights up with reactions. fans praising her ability to navigate nuanced discussions without oversimplifying or alienating anyone. The host, realizing he's losing ground again, shifts tactics once more. "What about economic freedom?" he asks, his tone sharper now. "Your side argues for less regulation, but critics say that leads to exploitation, low wages, poor working conditions, environmental damage. How do you respond to that?" Karoline doesn't hesitate. She leans forward slightly, her gaze steady and direct. Economic freedom doesn't mean letting corporations run wild. It means empowering individuals to succeed. Regulations are important, but they need to be smart, not suffocating. For instance, why punish small businesses with burdensome rules when they're already struggling to compete? Instead, let's focus on holding big players accountable while giving smaller ones room to grow. She goes on to share another real-life example, this time about a family-owned bakery she visited during a campaign stop. They were barely scraping by because of skyrocketing costs and red tape. But once they got access to resources and support, they thrived and hired more people in the process. That's what economic freedom looks like when it's done right. Her story strikes a nerve, especially among viewers who faced similar challenges. Some people in the audience whispered to their neighbors, sharing their own experiences. The host, growing increasingly flustered, tries to interrupt, but Karoline holds her ground. "Look," she adds, her voice warm but resolute. "Freedom isn't just a buzzword, it's a promise. And keeping that promise means ensuring everyone has a fair shot, not just those at the top." The audience erupts into applause, louder and more sustained than ever before. Even the crew behind the scenes exchanges glances, clearly impressed by her performance. The host, now visibly deflated, attempts one final critique. "But isn't that easier said than done? These are big problems with no easy solutions." Karoline nods, acknowledging the complexity of the issues. "You're absolutely right, they're big problems and solving them won't happen overnight. But here's the thing. Progress starts with conversations like this one. It starts with listening to each other, understanding different perspectives, and finding common ground. If we wait for perfect solutions, we'll never get anywhere. What matters is taking steps, however small, to move forward together." Her words draw thunderous applause, the kind that makes the floor vibrate. The audience stands to cheer, many clapping so hard their hands turn red. The host sits silently, defeated but unable to hide his grudging respect. As the segment heads into its final moments, it's clear that Karoline has not only won the debate, she's inspired everyone watching to rethink what leadership and progress truly mean. Behind the scenes, the producer whispers to the director, "We might need to book her again soon." On stage, the host wipes sweat from his brow, finally accepting that he's been outmatched. The audience, electrified by Karoline's performance, eagerly awaits her closing remarks. Whatever she says, next they know it's going to leave a lasting impression. As the debate moves into its final stretch, the energy in the studio is electric. The host, now visibly exhausted from trying to keep up with Karoline's relentless composure and sharp wit, attempts one last effort to salvage the conversation. "All right," he says, his voice carrying a mix of resignation and curiosity. "Let's talk about unity. You've mentioned finding common ground several times tonight. But isn't it true that in today's world, compromise feels almost impossible? How do you plan to bridge such deep divides?" Karoline takes a moment, her expression thoughtful but calm. She looks directly at the host, then turns slightly to address the camera, as if speaking directly to the millions watching at home. "You're right. It does feel impossible sometimes," she admits, her tone sincere. "But here's the thing. Unity doesn't mean everyone has to agree on everything. It means respecting each other enough to have honest conversations, even when they're hard." Her words resonate deeply, particularly with viewers who feel overwhelmed by the constant shouting matches dominating public discourse. Social media buzzes with reactions, fans praising her for cutting through the noise and focusing on what truly matters. The host listens silently, unsure how to respond. For once, he seems genuinely interested in hearing what she has to say. "Think about your own life," Karoline continues, her voice warm and relatable. "When you disagree with someone close to you, a friend, a family member, do you stop talking to them? No. You find ways to work through it because the relationship matters more than the disagreement. That's how we need to approach our politics. 2. The audience nods along, some whispering to their neighbors about how refreshing it feels to hear someone focus on connection rather than conflict. The host shifts uncomfortably in his seat, clearly aware that he's been outmatched, not just in arguments but in vision. He tries to interject, but Karoline presses on, determined to leave a lasting impression. "And let me be clear," she adds, her tone firm yet compassionate. "This isn't about ignoring real problems or pretending everything is fine. It's about tackling those problems together, instead of tearing each other apart, because at the end of the day, we all want the same things: safety, opportunity, dignity, and hope for the future." Her words draw thunderous applause, the kind that makes the floor vibrate beneath everyone's feet. Some people stand to cheer, others wipe away tears, moved by her message of resilience and optimism. Even the crew behind the scenes can't help but clap quietly, breaking protocol just this once. The host sits silently, his earlier bravado replaced by a quiet sense of respect. With the clock ticking down, Karoline delivers her closing remarks, addressing not just the host or the live audience but everyone tuning in from home. "Tonight, we've talked about big issues: freedom, equality, progress, leadership, but none of those matter unless we remember why we're having these conversations in the first place. We're not debating policies for the sake of winning arguments. We're trying to build a better future for all of us." She pauses, letting her words sink in before continuing. "That starts with listening, to each other, to our communities, to the voices often left out of these discussions. It's not always easy, and it won't happen overnight. But if we commit to working together instead of against each other, I truly believe we can create something amazing." The audience erupts into applause again, louder and more sustained than ever before. People cheer, whistle, and stomp their feet, creating an atmosphere of celebration and inspiration. On stage, the host manages a small smile, nodding slowly as if acknowledging that he's witnessed something extraordinary. When the show cuts to commercial, the buzz in the studio doesn't die down. If anything, it grows louder. Backstage, Karoline takes a deep breath, smiling as friends and colleagues congratulate her. One of the producers approaches her, shaking her hand enthusiastically. "That was incredible," he says. "We don't usually see debates like that." Karoline thanks him modestly, brushing off the praise with a humble shrug. "It's not about me," she replies. "It's about starting conversations that matter." Meanwhile, social media explodes with reactions. Clips of her best moments circulate rapidly, sparking debates and earning praise from all corners of the political spectrum. Viewers share their favorite lines, tag friends in posts, and flood comment sections with messages of gratitude. Critics of both sides weigh in, but even her detractors admit she played a masterful game, one that combined intelligence, empathy, and authenticity. Weeks later, the impact of that fateful interview continues to reverberate. Karoline becomes a household name, invited to speak on other major platforms and write opinion pieces for top publications. More importantly, she inspires countless individuals to embrace civil discourse without compromising their values. Her message of unity over division resonates far beyond politics, reminding people that progress requires patience, humility, and collaboration. For the liberal TV host, the experience serves as a humbling lesson. While he initially viewed the segment as just another debate, he walks away with a newfound appreciation for the power of genuine dialogue. In interviews afterward, he admits that Karoline's poise and preparation caught him off guard and forced him to rethink his approach to hosting challenging conversations. In the end, the story of Karoline's triumph transcends the confines of a single television appearance. It becomes a testament to the enduring value of courage, preparation, and authenticity. Whether you agree with her politics or not, one thing is undeniable: she left an indelible mark on everyone who watched. And in doing so, she proved that, even in the most polarized moments, there's still room for meaningful connection, if we're willing to listen.